The New Orleans Saints may have the best offensive and defensive play callers in the NFL. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst on WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're taking a look at kind of giving a deeper dive into the New Orleans Saints 44-19 victory over the Dallas Cowboys. We'll wonder when the tape will eventually catch up on New Orleans. I'm going to tell you why that might take a while and why pivoting will be key. We're also going to dive into the Saints defense a bit because still very impressive and a big key to the New Orleans Saints early season success. We're going to start everything off with Klint Kubiak, whose scheme just be scheming. We appreciate you very much for being here, for making us your first listen, and for being an everydayer on the Locked On Saints podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. The New Orleans Saints might have the best offensive and defensive play callers in the NFL, at least early on this season, and might have one of the best offensive and one of the best defensive schemes in the NFL at this point in the early season. Now, we're only 2 games in, so Ross, how big a claim are you really making here? I understand that, but this is so massively different from what we're accustomed to seeing from the New Orleans Saints. Starting off with Klint Kubiak, his offensive scheme has been outstanding. It's so funny to listen to people kind of discuss this scheme and talk about how, yeah, it looks like a Kyle Shanahan offense. And it's like, yeah, his dad, Klint Kubiak's dad, Gary Kubiak, helped create the Shanahan offense. The Kyle Shanahan offense, before it was the Kyle Shanahan offense, was the Mike Shanahan offense. We've talked about that a bunch here on the show. But it's so funny just to kind of like hear that. But the thing about it is that Klint Kubiak has done a really good job kind of updating sort of his dad's version, his dad and Mike Shanahan's version of their offense. So it really is kind of his scheme more than it is the Kyle Shanahan scheme or the Sean McVay scheme, which is 2 games in already what Klint Kubiak's scheme is being compared to. Some of the biggest names in the NFL when it comes to offensive play calling, offensive playmaking, offensive play design. That's the conversation. Those are the names that Klint Kubiak's name is already in conversation for. I've already got people that are like writing to me and saying, Ross, do you think we could, like the Saints could lose, Klint Kubiak as offensive coordinator to a team looking for a head coach next year? We're not going to discuss that right now because we're trying to enjoy. I'm trying to make sure that you enjoy a win like this. But it's so funny. It's just very different than the conversations that we're typically having around, or let me not say that we're typically having, but that we've been having as of late around offensive coordinators in New Orleans, right? Like no one was really talking about the possibility of Pete Carmichael getting hired away as a head coach somewhere, right? So just very, very different conversation. Let me give you a couple things that kind of highlight how the Saints trajectory in their new offense has continued to unfold. We highlighted play action, motion, stuff like that from last week. I want to highlight that again this week. The Saints, 54% of their 56 offensive snaps came with motion, and then 12 of 17 Derek Carr dropbacks included either what you would call play action or a play fake. I consider any time that you turn to a running back, even if you don't extend the ball, if you turn to a running back, it's at least a play fake in that situation. So I call it 12 of 17. You'll probably see other metrics that are like 10 of 17. I think that's what Pro Football Focus has, because they might only chart when the ball actually gets extended to the running back. I chart it all. If you turn your shoulders to the running back, it's a fake. It still impacts that linebacker, that linebacker core. It still impacts the opposing defense. So I call it all play fake, play action. So again, we're seeing the New Orleans Saints go from bottom of the NFL type usage in terms of percentages when it comes to play action at the end of last season to leading the NFL at more than 50% of their dropbacks so far, including play action. Absolutely remarkable flip when it comes to that. And then similarly, when it comes to motion, the Saints were one of the bottom two teams in the NFL using motion last year. They're near, if not at the top this year. We'll see how things go after the Monday night game between Philly and Atlanta. That might end up having some impact because Philly used a ton of motion to start out the season this year as well, even though they were actually the one and only team that used less motion on a per snap basis than New Orleans last year. So really, you can see the influence of the modern day offense and how Klint Kubiak is utilizing that to kind of build what they're doing over on the offensive side. Derek Carr and Klint Kubiak have worked so well together. And one of the reasons why everything has worked so well is because Derek Carr has not been put in situations where he's being asked to do too much or where he feels like he has to do too much. This isn't an anti-Derek Carr sentiment by any means, but the fact that Derek Carr has only thrown 39 passes over the course of the first two games is a good thing. It means that they're running the ball late is basically what that means, right? Like they're running the ball late because they have early leads. So it's a good thing to see this. Derek Carr threw 33 passes in his first game as a New Orleans Saints quarterback against the Tennessee Titans last year. In week one, he's only thrown 39 over the course of the first two games. And in the process, he's actually completed 30 of those 39 passes, by the way, the 76.5% completion percentage, and then also has a 142.4 passer rating, which is number one in the NFL among qualifying quarterbacks. Pretty remarkable in terms of what Derek Carr has been able to do and how that has all kind of blended well with what it is that Klint Kubiak has done. Derek Carr, of course, not the only one feeling the Klint Kubiak effect. Alvin Kamara had 115 rushing yards in the huge win against the Dallas Cowboys in Dallas. 112 of them, according to Next Gen Stats, came from going outside the tackles. So not only is it about the passing offense, not only is it about the play action, not only is it about the motion, it's about the run game as well. And that wide zone implementation that Klint Kubiak brought with him over from San Francisco, put his own twist on it. And this is what you're getting. You're getting a completely rejuvenated Alvin Kamara and a completely rejuvenated New Orleans Saints run game. 180 total yards rushing last week, 190 this week against the Dallas Cowboys. And also according to Next Gen Stats, and this is where I'll wrap up looking at offense here. According to Next Gen Stats, Derek Carr pressured only 3 times against the Dallas Cowboys, who had 3 players in week one combined for more than 20 pressures. And they're saying that Derek Carr was pressured only 3 times. And the reason why I highlight that in this Klint Kubiak kind of conversation is because his impact has also gone to the offensive line. We know the impact that's gone over to the wide receivers as well. Rashid Shaheed with 96 receiving yards. You had in this game 81 from Chris Olave. You know that they're benefiting. You know Derek Carr and Alvin Kamara are benefiting. You can see the production numbers. There's no production numbers for offensive line, right? And so giving up only 3 pressures to one of the NFL's best, if not the NFL's best pass rush, with a rookie starting left tackle that didn't practice 2 games, that's all scheme. Not all scheme, because it's the individual players too. They're being put in a scheme that plays to their strengths, but a lot of the scheme is supporting them in that way, and it's working. Micah Parsons, Dallas's premier defensive player, saying that they defended him, the New Orleans Saints, they blocked him, they defended him in ways that he's never been defended before in the NFL. That's all Klint Kubiak. So Klint Kubiak scheme be scheming, but he's not alone. Not only do the New Orleans Saints have one of the top offensive play callers now, they've maintained the top defensive play caller in the NFL with Dennis Allen. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. And I'm going to explain to you how easy it is. You take 2 to 6 players. The Prize Picks will give you a projection for each one of those players. You choose whether or not that player is going to come in at more or less than that projection. That's it. That's it. That's all that it takes. You get up to 4 of those right, and all of a sudden you're winning up to 100 times your entry back. And they'll even give you a free win on these. Well, you would consider it a free win. 1 passing yard for Caleb Williams, Chicago Bears quarterback, all through September gets you one of those 4 wins that can win you up to 100 times your entry back. Go and check them out today. Prize Picks doesn't get any more fun than that. Download the Prize Picks app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL so you can receive $50 instantly when you play $5. That's promo code LOCKEDONNFL on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive that $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Today's episode brought to you by friends over at DoorDash, my favorite food delivery app, coming in the clutch for me when I got back from watching the New Orleans Saints demolish the Dallas Cowboys. I demolished some pad thai. So the Saints weren't the only ones getting decisive victories. DoorDash helped me get a decisive victory over some noodles as well. So go check out DoorDash. I'll tell you, my favorite food delivery app. They also do more as well. I've gotten stuff from, corner stores, health stores, stuff like that as well. Really comes in the clutch. Will probably come in the clutch this morning when I get some coffee delivered, because this hotel coffee is not it. Use promo code LOCKEDFALL24 for 50% off, up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order over at DoorDash. Limited time offer, terms apply, and promo code is not valid on orders containing alcohol. It's DoorDash, your door to game day greatness, your door to more. Download the DoorDash app now so that you can get your game day favorites. Must be 21 or older to order alcohol. Drink responsibly. Alcohol available only in select markets. All right, family. While there's so much to be excited about as a New Orleans Saints fan around Klint Kubiak and what he has done to revamp this New Orleans Saints offense, there's still a lot to be excited about over on the New Orleans Saints defensive side as well, with Dennis Allen continuing to dominate on the defensive side of the football as a play caller, as a coach, as a play designer, however it is that you want to look at it. The New Orleans Saints are in a very, very unique and rarefied air type situation as the NFL season in 2024 begins. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being here. Don't forget, we're your team every day here on the show. So we'll be back with you with a fresh episode tomorrow morning, diving into the film study around today's game, or yesterday's game, how the big touchdown to Rashid Shaheed actually worked. The run game, there's so much for us to look at. What the New Orleans Saints did to stymie the Dallas offense. We're going to break into all of that stuff in tomorrow's film review episode. And of course, Locked on Saints insiders will get film study, writing on the screen, all that kind of stuff. If you're interested in joining the insider program, check out the link in the description. So Dennis Allen and his defense is still really, really, really good. And it's almost shocking to this point that his defense is still really good, because it has been really good for a long time, at least 7 years now. But really, you could see the tide start to turn, starting back in 2017. Yeah, so I would say that's about that is 7 years. So once Ross learned how to do math, that kind of gives you a better understanding of what it is that New Orleans is doing here. But what they're doing is unique. It's specific. It's rarefied air as an NFL team to come in the early goings of a season and have what feels like the top offensive play caller paired with a top defensive play caller, and having the talent to support all of it. So I want to kind of dive into what has worked for the New Orleans Saints defense so far early on this season. The first thing that I want to take a look at is what the Saints have done pressure and takeaway wise, because those are always the big things that you're looking for in these games, right? You got to get pressure on the opposing quarterback, and you got to take the ball away, get the ball back to your offense. Well, the New Orleans Saints right now are tied for second place in the NFL with 5 takeaways so far this season. They've generated 5 total takeaways, 4 interceptions, and then the fumble, strip and recovery by Tyrann Mathieu last week. So now you've gotten, these fantastic plays from the safety position. You get a great interception and return from Paulson Adebo against Dallas, all of that. So they're taking the ball away. They're getting it back to their offense. The only team that has more takeaways than the New Orleans Saints right now sits at 7 in the league. So not a bad situation, not a bad space for the Saints to be in, tied at number 2 with 5 takeaways over the course of the first 2 games. They've also got 7 sacks so far in those first 2 games as well, which is tied for 3rd in the NFL. One team's got like 11 sacks, another team's got 9. The Saints are sitting with 7. And so they're getting pressure, and they're doing it from everywhere, right? Like in the first game, the New Orleans Saints defensive line had no sacks, but they still finished with 4 sacks. They got 1 from Demario Davis at linebacker. Then they got 3 more from Alontae Taylor coming out of the slot, right? So you have your second level and your secondary contributing sacks in the first game. Then they come into the second game against Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys, and all 3 of their sacks come from their defensive line. 1.5 from Carl Granderson, a half sack from Chase Young, who was reunited with his old friend, old NFC East mate, Dak Prescott. And then Brian Brzee had the strip sack that almost turned into what would have been an 8th takeaway for the New Orleans Saints. And remember that takeaway numbers also don't include a couple of other things. Like they don't include the 2 turnovers on downs that the Saints defense forced in this game against Dallas, for instance, right? So all of those end up having sort of this big impact. And then you think about, I can't remember if the blocked punt counts towards the takeaways. I don't think that it does, with the Saints sitting at just 5. And so you also had the blocked punt by Juwan Johnson. I think because the punt was blocked and then also went forward, it counts like a little bit differently, but it's just another way to look at it, where you also got the ball back in much better field position in that situation than had the punt gotten off. So you're seeing special teams contribute. You're seeing the defense get off the field in a variety of different ways, and you're seeing the takeaways that are coming from all that as well. And it's making life hard on opposing quarterbacks as well. Right now, opposing quarterbacks over the course of the first 2 weeks, and we know one of these quarterbacks was Bryce Young, okay? And while I'm not doing the the Carolina Panthers, they don't count, like the Saints performed against, but I'm not doing that thing. I will say, like, Bryce Young's not a very good quarterback. And that's just me being consistent with my draft takes and all these other things. But we understand that one of those was Bryce Young, but the other was Dak Prescott, who just got a brand new deal. Clearly Dallas believes in him, has had some nice games, all these other things, and has played a good career. 56.9 is what the New Orleans Saints are limiting opposing quarterbacks to when it comes to passer rating. That's the second lowest passer rating allowed in the NFL, and it's by 0.1. It's 56.9 is where New Orleans is. The Pittsburgh Steelers defense is at 56.8 against opposing passers. It's literally a 0.1 difference from being number 1 in the NFL. And this is all what Dennis Allen is doing. Dennis Allen scheming up these pressure packages at the line. You're seeing the stunts to twist on the inside. You're seeing the stunts to twist on the outside. You're seeing the Cam Jordan on the inside, while Chase Young and Carl Granderson on the outside type formations and all that. It is still very much a defensive identity, or there is still very much, rather, a defensive identity on this team. And now you've added this so far spectacular offense. And that's going to be really tough for teams to beat while the New Orleans Saints are rolling. Now, again, they're not going to roll like this, 47 points, 44 points. They're not going to be that team all 17 games this season, but that's okay because they might not need to be. I think what this shows you is that in a game where the Saints defense maybe struggles a little bit, the offense might be able to keep pace. In a game where the New Orleans Saints offense struggles a little bit, the defense should be able to limit scoring over on their side. And then if it goes bad on both sides, it's a bad game. You know what I mean? It's a bad game. You walk away with a loss. You take that L, you lick your wounds, you get back to the next game, and you hope that it all comes together. But that is different than what we've seen. In the past few years, if the Saints defense is not balling out, then the New Orleans Saints offense did not have the artillery, the firepower, the weapons, the game plan, the scheme to be able to keep pace, to be able to last in a shootout. This is a team that looks like it could almost welcome a shootout at one point, just for the fun of being able to go back and forth with another team. And they're doing it without being in a situation to where they're exhausting their weapons. The Saints defensive scheme keeps this game in. They've allowed just 14.5 points average over the course of the first 2 games, 29 total. That's, I think, in the top 5 of the NFL. This is what I was going to say this is what you were hoping for from New Orleans, but I don't even know if anybody really thought that this was possible enough to hope for it. Maybe some of you did, but man, what a remarkable turnaround for this team to be able to not only flip what it's doing on the offensive side in such an emphatic way, but then be able to maintain the supremacy as a defensive team over the course of these first two games. This is going to be a tough team to stop while they're rolling here early. And of course, another tough test up against the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm sure AJ Brown will be magically healed by the time that game rolls around on a short week. But big one to watch, because if the Saints do this again, it's going to be really hard to refute that this is one of the best teams in the NFC, if not one of the best teams in the NFL. And it's a big part of the reason why is the offense, the defense, the scheme, the play callers, the coaching. And boy, that is a welcome change from what we've seen over the course of the past few years. All right, coming up next, look, film's eventually going to catch up with the New Orleans Saints, but I think that there's one thing in particular that allows the New Orleans Saints to kind of keep some distance from that point. And of course, the pivot is going to be pivotal. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today so you can get affordable tickets even down to the last minute. I love Game Time because I'm a procrastinator. I'm also a little spontaneous. And so sometimes there's an event that I didn't know that was happening. I find out that it's happening and it's happening that night. Game Time. That's the place that I go. Or I was supposed to buy tickets for something months ago. I didn't. I get to a couple days in advance and I go, oh yeah, I was supposed to buy tickets for that thing. Game Time. Perfect. Absolute lifesaver. Lots of transparency as well. You can turn on all-in pricing so you're not taken by surprise by fees. By the time you get to checkout, you can see views from your seats. And now with Game Time picks, the curation makes it so much easier for you to find and save on your favorite sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and much more. So go and check them out today. Take all the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Everyone is wondering, when are things going to catch up with the New Orleans Saints after 47 and 45 point outburst to start the season? Look, it's eventually going to happen, but the Saints have something working in their advantage so far that might delay that inevitable. We appreciate you very much for being here, for making us your first listen of the day, every day here on Locked On Saints. So here's the thing that I think that helps New Orleans big time. And if you tuned into the live game reaction episode, then you heard me talk about this. But the thing that I think that helps the New Orleans Saints so much on the offensive side when it comes to tape catching up with them is that the Saints haven't had to show their entire offense. They haven't had to open up their offensive playbook. They've developed these leads so early, which is going to happen, by the way, when you're scoring points on 15 consecutive possessions with your number one team out there, right? With your starting offense out there, 15 consecutive possessions is crazy. Like, that's insane. And so when you do that and you score 30 points in the first half in 2 straight games, when you come back in the second half, you don't really have to do a ton new. You know what's working. There's no reason to change that. Just keep doing that, but make some little minor tweaks where you can. This is what the New Orleans Saints have been doing and Klint Kubiak has been doing in the second half for the past few games. Now, they'll vary some things up, right? The outside zone runs, the tracks to the outside, the play action passes, all these things. You'll continue to see those over the course of the game. Don't get me wrong. But what you're seeing is maybe a little bit of a personnel adjustment. Maybe they flip the play in a certain way, or maybe they flip a route in a certain way, or maybe it's, Mason Tipton out on the field instead of Chris Olave, who's getting a breather, or maybe it's, Jamal Williams or Taysom Hill behind Derek Carr instead of Alvin Kamara, or maybe they're motioning into a formation. So for instance, if New Orleans were to come out in the first half and find a lot of success in their outside zone run, which is exactly what they did against Dallas, they might come into a specific formation, maybe a tight bunched formation with tight ends in line, all these other things. one receiver split out to the left side. And so they might come out in that and then run the run play to, the wide receiver side. But then in the second half, they might come out and maybe it's Jamal Williams that's behind Derek Carr instead of Alvin Kamara. Maybe that wide receiver that was originally out wide lines up kind of tight to the line and then motions or even crosses the field from one side or the other to that other spot. Then you take the snap, and then instead of running to the receiver side, you run to the tight end side. It's the same play, same formation, same look, just with some little tweaks, a little bit of eye candy, a little bit of window dressing, and maybe some personnel adjustments that give your starters a little bit of rest. Maybe don't clue things to the defense, all those other bits. That's what the New Orleans Saints have been doing for the majority of their second halves. I mean, look at the game against Dallas where this team had an onslaught of points in the first 2 quarters and then scored 9 points in the second half by basically playing keep away, right? Now, the only reason why they scored 9 points, it should have been 10 points, but the extra point was blocked off of the Derek Carr sneak touchdown, hit him with the hee-hee. You look at that drive was designed to chew as much time off the clock. I mean, they were almost only 2 third-quarter possessions because of how long the New Orleans Saints possessed that football, which is for over 7.5 minutes, which was, by the way, on one drive, almost as much, if not more, than their entire time of possession for the entire second quarter where they had multiple possessions. So it just kind of shows you a little bit of what New Orleans did. They came in and they said, okay, run the base stuff, run the stuff that they've already seen, make some adjustments, maybe a little something new here and there and everything. But outside of that, didn't have to open the playbook up very much. And so that's going to help the New Orleans Saints in the idea that the quote unquote tape will catch up with them, right? This is something we hear all the time. Particularly the time that you hear about this is when a backup quarterback comes in or a new quarterback, a rookie quarterback comes in and tears it up for 3 games, 2 games, and then all of a sudden defenses catch up with them. It's because they literally can watch the tape and the tape catches up with what it is doing. They can see where that quarterback succeeds, where they thrive, where they struggle, and then find ways to put them in those situations where they struggle. You'll see the Saints, the same thing happen to the Saints. Eventually, at some point, some team's defense is going to get a hold of, okay, here's where they're not performing as well. Try to get them into those situations and they'll make that work. And this is where going back to the Saints defense, which has been on tape for years and years and years and years and years at this point, is massively beneficial because, sure, limit the offense for a game, but if the New Orleans Saints defense comes out there and is able to put them in good situations, it doesn't matter, right? The Saints just have to put points on the board and find ways to get those points on the board. But if they're getting short fields, if the defense is keeping points off the board from the opposing offense, then it helps. And remember, we watched Sean Payton's offense. I don't want to put these two things on the same pedestal. I think it's a little unfair to do that, especially this early in the season, but hear me out. Sean Payton's offense was on tape for years and never really got curbed until the Saints kind of couldn't run the scheme anymore, if we're being honest. Whether it was, lingering or not lingering, but like dwindling ability in the passing game, an aging offensive line, all these other things, like whatever it was, or just changes in terms of how the Saints were forced to use Alvin Kamara in those situations, right? And things like that. Like those are the things that caught up with New Orleans. They caught up with themselves way before defenses ever caught up with them. And so that's what I'm looking at here for the New Orleans Saints. That could also be true for this Klint Kubiak outstanding offense that we've seen. I do think, too, that pivoting will be pivotal for the New Orleans Saints. They've got to be ready with more. And my understanding is that they have not really had to really dive into their playbook very much. So the longer that they can kind of push that off, the more they're going to have to pivot to. But the key to pivoting is not going to be changing your entire offensive approach. You got to stay with the same identity. And this team very much has an identity. They want to run the football. They want to mobilize their offensive line, and they want to threaten vertically with Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed and make you defend their speed. That's what the New Orleans Saints are doing right now. And it works because so far no one's been able to hang with that, right? Certainly no one's been able to hang with Rashid Shaheed for a meaningful amount of time. And then we saw Chris Olave's game open up a little bit more against Dallas. And so I think that those are the things that become pivotal for you as you look to pivot for this New Orleans Saints offense is just making little tweaks here and there, but sticking to what your identity is. And the fact that the New Orleans Saints now have an offensive identity, which it doesn't feel like they've had in the past, that's going to be big for them. So eventually, some defense is going to catch up with this New Orleans Saints team. But if there's a new rabbit to pull out of the hat, which you only need a few of these, you don't have to completely open up the book and give it all away. You're just looking to be selective and pull a rabbit out of the hat. Maybe you got a long handkerchief, and then you got the flower that shoots water. If you got all three of those in a game, you're good. You don't have to dig into the whole bag of tricks here. You could just pull out three pretty basic ones and then do enough to pivot away. And so I'm really, really excited to see when Klint Kubiak's offense faces adversity against a defense that's kind of found it out a little bit in terms of what they've done, what the next evolution looks like, right? Like we're in the cell games here, right? What does the next evolution look like? So I'm excited to see the next form, the final form, all that. I'm ready for it. All right, y'all. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being a Locked On Saints, your first listen of the day, every day. For your second listen, make sure you go and check out the new Locked On NFL. Tyler Rowland giving you that double shot of NFL espresso every morning. He's hyped about the Saints. Tony Wiggins in the barbershop. He's going. He's kind of looking down at the Dallas Cowboys after this one. So make sure you go and check out Locked On NFL today, wherever you get your podcast. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making Locked On Saints a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.